This panel was recorded Friday, March 19th, 2021, during the 15th Annual Public Administration Research Conference hosted by the Center for Public and Nonprofit Management at UCF. The panel is titled CPNM's Human Trafficking Initiative, a discussion on bridging research and fieldwork through community engagement and collaboration. The panel is moderated by Mr. Justin Miller, Assistant Director of the Center for Public and Nonprofit Management.
Panel off. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone for joining us at this, our fourth and final panel for the Society and Community track at this year's Public Administration Research Conference. It is our 15th year hosting this conference. And this year, we had 15 panels distributed across 4 different functions of the public administration community and profession. And we have been engaging academics from all over the world and practitioners as well. So today has been a very informative event. And this panel is the one I've been waiting for all day, simply because we're introducing the human trafficking problem set to the public administration community in a deliberate way. We know UCF has been looking at the human trafficking problem set from a sociological perspective and from a tourism industry perspective, and in a limited degree from a criminal justice perspective. But as we say in the military, sometimes it's better to get left of boom, as they say. And so when we're talking about problems in the public domain, and what they mean is we're talking about policies and programs that span the public sector's functions. This program panel actually was originally framed in the safety and security track that we had within the conference, simply because it starts at the basic level of the individual human and them being safe and secure in whatever community or society that they're in. But we also know that the human trafficking problem set trickles into each of these other areas. And so when we talk about the nonprofit operations piece of the human trafficking mission and the role that victim service organizations play in anti-trafficking and counter-trafficking and supporting victims after they become victims, and the data and knowledge that comes out of understanding who the victims are and where they come from, be they part of the LGBTQAI community or a minority or someone from a socioeconomically depressed area, those realities brought this panel into this track and not the safety and security panel, because we want to look at this from the nonprofit perspective. We want to look at this from the public policy and public administration perspective. And we know that given the research agenda we framed out through the School of Public Administration, to some degree, that we will hit those other wickets as we get there. The objective for the panel today is to, first and foremost, as I said, introduce human trafficking to the public administration community, but then also facilitate a dialogue that allows us to move forward. Kind of do an assessment as to who we have at the table and what it means and what we're thinking as professionals in the field and in the community and researchers, given other disciplines that play into this problem set. And so with that pre-forward, if you will, welcome to the Human Trafficking Policies, Programs, and Partnerships panel, where we're seeking to address a wicked problem through partnerships and policies and procedures, right? The human trafficking problem set, as defined by the United Nations, is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, or deception with the aim of exploiting them for profit. The UN further notes that men, women, and children of all ages and from all backgrounds can become victims of this crime, which occurs in every region of the world. It's an international problem around the world, and it is a local problem here in Orlando, and it crosses city, county, state, and international borders. The panel today gathers as an ad hoc team of experts pursuing an initiative with the intent of building an institute that addresses the human trafficking challenge through research, collaboration, and community engagement. This group approaches human trafficking from a public policy, public administration, and nonprofit management perspective. And the problem posed by human trafficking centers on society and community, but it lends itself and ties itself to every other public sector function, be it safety and security at the human level or group and identity levels, or at the transnational and international level. And it ties itself to sustainability and resilience as it relates to natural disasters where folks are exploited afterwards, which we see with war. And it ties itself to governance instability because marginalized communities oftentimes lend itself to instability down the road. And so with us today, we have our panel of experts, which I'm not going to introduce them other than to say that we have with us Dr. Akim Tadik, who is kind of our leader for the Human Trafficking Initiative within the Center for Public and Nonprofit Management. He is helping us corral our talents to to draft papers, to develop a literature trail, and really get a handle on what's out there that needs to be done given the public administration problem set. We also have Dr. Marisa Concha, also from the UCF, who is our primary the co-PI on a lot of these initiatives, and Dr. Jihua Huang, who I apologize if I didn't say that correctly. Did I say that correctly? No, I did. Okay, good. Okay. And we also have Brianna Yoder, a future doctor, and Rebecca Entris, a future doctor, and Jan Edwards and Tomas Laris, who are our practitioner resident experts who really advise and inform the ideas that we circulate, because our intent is to understand what's going on in the field, drive that into the research sector, push that research back into the field so that we can make sure that this is a turbocharged problem solution set. That being said, I'm going to ask each of the panel members here to introduce themselves, kind of highlight who they are, what their name is, the organization they're with for the audience, and then how their organization, as they title it in the conversation, relates to the human trafficking problem, and then of course what expertise they're bringing to the table, whether it's direct or indirect, and any research or partnership initiatives that they have on the horizon. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Dr. Tadik, if you wouldn't mind, sir.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Justin, for the wonderful introduction to this important topic. My name is Abdullah Kim, Associate Professor at the School of Public Administration here at UCF. I also direct the Public Administration Masters in Public Administration program, as well as a Masters in Public Policy. This is my third year at UCF. My background, my PhD was in public policy. I majored in emergency management. Majored in environmental policy and minored in emergency management policy or disaster policies, as some would have it. So this group really, our work began sort of, less than a year ago, really, when we all came together as a group to kind of start looking at this. So by no means am I an expert at all on human trafficking. In fact, I've learned so much within about 9-10 months that we kind of came together, mostly from Thomas, who's the guru here. But really, I'm very excited. I think when I joined the group, one of the things that I was kind of surprised about looking at the literature and everything is that there isn't much work out there in terms of lessons that have been learned and things that we can do to really get to the root problem. I see a lot of people trying to advocate for it, but I don't see also in terms of policy at national level that really go to try to root out this problem. And then also kind of learning more about the scope of the issue, that this is an international issue of, that is, the industry is worth billions of dollars. And so, that is kind of what got me started. And then I think, coming down and working with this group and kind of expanding and working with, communities, like a United Abolitionists, I think is making me to realize that there's a lot to be done. Honestly, it needs a lot more people working together harmoniously to really dive in and root out the issue. As Justin rightly said earlier in his introductory comments or message, that this is a wicked problem, and so it's going to take a lot of interdisciplinary folks, people from engineering, computer science, public administration, social work, community engagement areas, and all that to come together, law enforcement, to really be able to even just make a mark, really. And so we're hoping that at the end of the day, we can establish an initiative at UCF, that can bring together students, faculty, staff, as well as other centers that are and community partners that are here around the Orlando area, to kind of start building a strong coalition that can go and sort of study this issue better and provide a safe world for our children. So with that, I'll stop for now and let others introduce themselves, and then we'll come back and have more discussion. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Dr. Concha, would you like to introduce yourself and your areas of expertise and passion for the problem?
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Marisa Concha. I'm a lecturer at UCF. I teach classes in research methods, pattern evaluation, resource development for graduate and undergraduate students. And lately I've been focusing a lot on undergraduate research as well. I have a PhD in public affairs from UCF, and I also have a master's in Latin American Studies, and that's where from University of Miami, and that's a little bit of where my passion is in human trafficking. There is a lot of human trafficking cases and situations in Latin America, specifically in Mexico and in other parts of Central America, and the way that survivors are carried through the United States by coyotes and all of those problems that are emerged because of that. It's one of the passions that I have to with this topic and with the special initiative is that I really want to highlight the cases and the stories that survivors have in different ways, and the ways that we can also prevent human trafficking and also increase awareness on different age groups. And that brings me to my second topic, is that I have done a lot of work on community participatory research and have done different types of interventions to serious games. And it is my hope to collaborate with Jan Edwards and also with Thomas in terms of creating a game for increasing awareness with middle school students on how to report human trafficking warning signs among their peers or somebody else that they may know that are relatives or friends in their community and so on. I also have been exposed to the topic of human trafficking because I have worked with the International Rescue Committee as a consultant for several years, and I have evaluated their programs on human trafficking prevention and also collaboration efforts in South Florida and Miami. So I learned a lot about the essence of what it means to be a survivor, but also what are some of the services they receive and what are some of the, effects of the services in their lives in terms of improving the lives of survivors. So, and how to do research with vulnerable population, that's something else that I learned. And it's very difficult because even if you know the language, even if you're using a culturally inappropriate linguistically method to contact them, still is something that you have to gain the trust, you have to gain some sort of a relationship with the survivors to be able to interview them and ask them to some extent some sensitive questions without re-traumatizing them. And also how different agencies collaborate, law enforcement, faith-based organizations, nonprofits in general, and how to exchange services and exchange information. And I'm also been involved in different studies related to refugees and self-sufficiency and acculturation processes for refugees. And some of those refugees have also been survivors of human trafficking. So once again, it's one of the topics that is close to my heart, and I hope to learn from everyone in this panel in terms of collaborating, exchanging knowledge, exchanging from different disciplines and perspectives. So I'm very glad and happy to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Concha. She, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm really glad to be here, and I want to apologize in advance if you hear some noise in the background. I have 2 young kids at home, and now they're just, off school and getting very excited. My name is Jihua Huang. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Public Administration. This is my 3rd year. So I mainly teach in the programs, the public policy and public administration programs. And my research interests are public policy, immigration, and urban development. So I published some papers on like the local immigration policies and how that affect different groups of people, and especially minority groups and groups of with disadvantages. So I joined this initiative because I feel like I would like to do something to further our understanding of this issue. As Justin and Akim mentioned earlier, the human trafficking is an extremely complex and a wicked problem, and it affects a large number of people and families. And we can find its roots in various socioeconomic, political, and cultural forces. So one thing I would like to highlight is the inextricable links between immigration and human trafficking. And then I feel like there's some is my area, something I can do to further our understanding of the issue. So we can perceive immigration, as the legal form of migration, and human trafficking is the one that's taking place in the dark or, in shadow. Oftentimes people travel or migrate for economic reasons or political reasons. We migrate from less developed countries to developed countries, from war-torn areas to politically stable areas. And it's this desperation to migrate for a better life that renders, some immigrants or undocumented highly vulnerable to being trafficked. So and public policy, like immigration policy, can affect this likelihood and severity of being trafficked at several points in the process of migration, right? For example, the legal immigration system in the US determines the number and type of people that we would admit to the country and we will welcome. And those that fall outside of these categories may turn to illegal or alternative ways of migration, and they may become undocumented immigrants and who are susceptible to being trafficked or exploited. And and other points, like for those who have been trafficked into the country, some immigration policies could make it hard, like create barriers for them to seek victim protection. For example, the U visa for victims of domestic violence. For these like non-immigrant people, right? They require the victims to prove that they are victims of illegal or criminal activities, and they also need to prove that they have information to help the law enforcement in the investigation in exchange for protection and legal status. And this makes these victims, they fear for their life, and then they need to go through several formal processes to get these documents to prove that they are valuable. And that just makes these people, like just stay in the shadow, make them really hard to come out and to seek help. And also for those victims who already broken free of the control of traffickers, right? The anti-immigration rhetoric or the sentiments in their local neighborhood sometimes can, create this undeserving or deviant social construction around these people, and then also force them to stay in the shadow and remain integrated to society. So there are a lot of immigration laws that have chilling effects for these undocumented people and deter them from approaching, the government for assistance. And I think that, there's got to be something that we can do with practitioners and learn from their best practices, to help kind of mitigate, let's not say solve this problem, but at least mitigate this problem. So with that, I will stop here and happy to talk more later.
If you don't mind, if I can shift things up just a second to bring a practitioner in, I can do a 3-to-1 because we've got 2 primary practitioners here. So and there's six researchers. So if I could get Tomas to introduce himself and United Abolitionists and what their role is and where you see this going.
Sure. Thank you, Justin, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tomas Lars again, and the president of United Abolitionists. And I've been fighting human trafficking since July 2004. And so I know this issue is complex, and yet there's been great strides made in the anti-trafficking movement, both at the federal, state, and local level. And my piece in this is training the trainer, have a passion for that, those first responders. Also, because of that experience and going with law enforcement, on recoveries, on stings, all these years, the need for a hotline was initiated. And so we began a 24/7 hotline to assist first responders and others. And in the last 3 years, survivors are actually calling as well, which was a change from the previous years. So we're grateful for that. Word's getting around the community. And about a year and a half ago, we changed from being just Florida abolitionists to United Abolitionists. And so we've been expanding our efforts now, thanks to technology, been able to do trainings, wherever someone's from, and equipping other communities on how to respond appropriately with the hotline and those crucial elements of the need for the sensitivity of being victim-centered, trauma-informed, and that those critical few hours that you could maybe save someone's life. And so it's an honor to be with you all today, and I look forward to the conversation.
Brianna, please.
Hi, my name is Brianna Yoder. I'm actually a little bit of the odd one out because I'm at the University of Georgia as opposed to UCF. I'm a doctoral candidate there in the Department of Public Administration and Policy. I primarily focus on nonprofit organizations and nonprofit governance. And so I was brought onto the team about a year ago, to provide that kind of perspective, come at it from the nonprofit academic as opposed to the nonprofit practitioner perspective. So that's where I fit in on here. My background in terms of research doesn't exclusively focus on human trafficking. Mostly focuses on women's issues more broadly. And so I use feminist and critical frameworks in a lot of my research. And I also talk a lot about that within the group. And then part of my graduate assistantship is through the University of Georgia's J.W. Fanning Institute for Leadership. And they do a lot of leadership training and a lot of capacity building. And so I also bring that perspective.
Thank you, Brianna. Rebecca?
Hi, my name is Rebecca Entris. I am a PhD student in public affairs at the University of Central Florida. And most of my research interests have some sort of social equity component, and being a vulnerable population, victims of human trafficking fit into that research agenda. I also have some practical experience relevant to human trafficking, where I previously worked for the Florida legislature and worked on legislation, writing and analyzing some of the legislation at the state level to provide services to victims of human trafficking, and how kids who are in DCF and DJJ in the state care have how they deal with victims of human trafficking, having some more specialized approaches. So that is some of my expertise that I bring, and we have worked on a bunch of papers, which I'm sure we'll get into later.
And Jan Edwards, please.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jan Edwards, and I am the founder of Paving the Way Foundation. We are a fierce disruption in the cycle of child trafficking, and we do that through training and educational programs. We've educated over 14,000 kids in the past 4 years, all up and down the Eastern Seaboard. And we do pre and post tests, right? So we want to know what they think they thought they knew about human trafficking, and then really what they learned. And what we're discovering is our kids want to know this information. And the other important piece too is Tomas and I work really closely together. Wonder Twins activate. We, he's on one side, I'm on the other, and we're out to interrupt so that they don't have to make that phone call, because we know what it's like on the other end. We know what survivors are dealing with on a daily basis. Surviving human trafficking isn't something you get over, ever. You can heal, but there's no getting over it. So we're out to prevent it on the front side. And we do that through training in schools, churches, and communities. And we've been doing this for 8 years and training for 4. And I would have to say, some of you may know this, some of you may not know this, but the Central Florida region is one of the most cohesive environments to combat this. Both Tomas and I work with organizations all over the country. And when I pick up the phone to try find a victim's advocate in another state, they don't know what I'm talking about, and they don't know who to send me to. We know in the state of Florida, if somebody calls and says, hey, I think I might have a potential victim in Miami, we know who to call. If we have a potential victim in Jacksonville, we know who to call. And that's really, I think, one of my goals for this type of consortium, to really validate and have a working document that we can pick up and take to other cities, other countries, quite frankly, and empower them to have end-to-end solutions so we really can tackle this. So there's prevention education on the front side, education in the middle, policy, all of it. So there's a working, living, breathing opportunity for us to make the kind of difference I'm clear we're all out to make. Thanks.
So now that we've got an understanding as to who we have in the room and on the team, I'd like to throw this on the table. I've talked with many of the folks at length about the human trafficking problem set. I know that Tomas has said that, hey, we need to throw a think tank at this and bring the big heads in to kind of address it. Jan just kind of alluded to the fact that we do need some policy solutions out there that are enforceable and executable. And Dr. Tadik alluded to the reality that there's not much going on, right? There is some literature, but there's not a lot of traction yet. So which comes first, the policy and the policy or the partnership?
Okay, I'm going to take a stab at that because I have a question, Dr. Tadik. When you say policy, because I wrote that down, I was like, I got to talk about this. When you say policy, say more about that, because I work very closely with state and federal legislative bodies about this, advocating, not the other thing that people do. I fully advocate, and I work with NCOSI and Shared Hope and all the organizations around the state to get pieces of legislation passed. When you say policy, can you be more specific for me? So then I think I can maybe address part of it, and then Tomas, I think, can point to it too.
Yes, thank you very much. So, there are many policies kind of range from different levels. We talk about international policy, talk about national policy, state policy, local. And so I think for me, in the international sense, for instance, if you look at what United Nations is doing, for me, I see a lot more traction there compared to at the national level, even though I know there's some policies that have been implemented by, for instance, the Trump administration, the Obama administration. But I don't seem to see a lot of that trickle sort of down in terms of even funding associated to those with those policies to be implemented locally. So I think sometimes, this has been documented in the policy literature that sometimes you cannot pass legislations and you don't really give policies, but you don't really put funding attached to it and help people implement it. So That's something I think maybe I was kind of trying to allude to, is that there is no support, financial support, to implement many of those policies in terms of programs. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, good. Thank you, Tomasa. I have a funny feeling you're going to tee right up behind me. That's actually not the case. We can do more, by the way. But there, I think, are approximately 21 pieces of legislation, most of which have funding attached to it. And right now, we're in the middle of getting the BOCA policy fixed for victims of domestic violence. And every single shelter across the country relies on that funding. And somehow it just didn't get passed last year. And luckily it passed the House on Thursday, and it's on its way to the Senate. And that's the funding that funds, Harbor House and Safe Shelter of Seminole County and the place up in Ocala. And Tomas, I know you know all the other shelters too. It's not my bailiwick. There's the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. There's the Missing and Indigenous Women and Persons Act that just got passed. I'm actually working with some indigenous populations out in Arizona about this. So there actually is, what's missing is we're not talking about it. It's like people are kind of secretive about, oh, by the way, I got funding. Don't tell anybody because someone's going to compete for it. So kind of pointing to what you're saying, we have policies, there is funding, but what's missing is the deeper funding. And I agree 100% with you on that. It's far less expensive to educate a child than to rescue a woman or a man. That is a lifelong challenge versus how about we just talk to our kids about this and get them educated, right? But it's not as exciting, it's not as sexy, it's not as thrilling as a rescue. Well, this costs money, a lot of money. This costs less. And what I'm always wondering is, why aren't we focusing on that part, Because this part's really important. And then there's this part that can actually prevent it. So, Tomas, I'm going to let you take the rest of that policy conversation because I know you're far more knowledgeable about all the Victims and Survivors Acts that have been passed.
Yes, well, thanks, Jan. From my experience as well, is that really what I call the power of collaboration is what's missing. I just spoke to a group in Thailand last week and began to start connecting folks there that I knew. And we're going to do some training for them, especially on crisis response. I also spoke to a group in South Carolina this past week, and they were not connected either. And so connected them. So I think what's happened is because there's, people are doing a small group's doing a lot of the work and the heavy lifting. There is a disconnection to even their state legislation or their nation's laws. And what I'm doing now with United Abolitionists and thus the name United is when I go into a community, or the calls I've been getting lately from around the world, is seeing what's already going on in their community and connecting folks, because it takes a village, as we all know that proverb. And I believe in order to really combat and fight human trafficking, it's going to take really the power of collaboration, which is communication and really care coordination together. And so those are the missing pieces. And I hope to be able to help as many communities in the next chapter.
So I just want to respond to that quickly. Thank you so much, Jan, for educating me on that. So as you can say, when there's no dissemination of information, people, it's hard to know what's going on. So I'm really glad that at least you guys that are in the front lines, kind of, that, what the challenges are. So one question that I'll have is, so how can we make that right? And what can we do to make sure that people are aware of that? That they are funding, and you should apply for them, because I'm pretty sure that some people, if this word is not getting out, that there may be perhaps some other needs of people that have the need for that funding, or if they don't even know it exists, they can't even apply for it. So that's one. The other thing I just want to say too is to sort of support your earlier statement about prevention is better than cure, right? In fact, in emergency management, there was a study that was done about 10 years ago that found that if the government, FEMA, invests $1 in mitigating disasters, they can save $4 in recovery costs. But if more research study now found that it's actually $1 to about $6 to $8. So it's kind of what you're saying, right? If we can educate kids, make sure they don't even get to that point whereby they become victims, then we can save a lot more dollars in trying to rehabilitation, trying to get them back, and then all that stuff. So thank you.
And so if I
You're welcome. And I'm going to tag up just a little bit what Tomas said, the collaboration piece, the reason why we're known for it around the country, aren't we, Tomas? is because we all talk to each other. You know, we're all like, hey, what are you doing? Hey, what are you up to? We all sit on the same task forces. We all, you know, because we're committed to make the difference. Like making a difference for our community is far more important to us than, you know, really anything else. And it's going to take collaboration to do that. And listening for what the community wants and needs. You know, the fact that Tomas is going into these other countries and asking them what they already have versus coming in as the savior. I think that's the other piece too, is when we empower communities to understand what's happening and then have them develop it's like, well, what's going to work for Paramore may not work for Winter Park, but let's have them develop it. Here's the problem. Here's, you know, some potential solutions. Why not y'all talk about it and figure out how you want to solve it? It creates buy-in for the community and, you know, also pride of ownership. You know, because they're going to come up with things that we'll never think about, which is how it should be, in my opinion, how it should be designed.
And it also empowers them. And that's a key thing for community members. Empowerment, it means a lot for them, and it means that they can actually do something and become agents for social change for their own communities.
And so if I could ask the next question then is, what would, because this team has done a little bit of research, and let me just ask the question this. Of the research we have done to date, we've touched on immigration through the research efforts thus far. We've touched on public policy, everything down from the United Nations policy through the TVPA. Given what's on the policy docket that it has been passed right now, where do we identify the gaps as being from either the research perspective or the practitioner perspective? Because Jan alluded to there being policies, but they haven't been passed yet. And we know that the most recent legislation in the United States on human trafficking doesn't start mandate that data be reporting until this summer, right? And so those programs haven't been firmed up yet to where we can collect that data because it's still an evolutionary thing. So what's the research agenda look like given what we know from the research side of the house? And then after the research side of the house answers, see what the practitioner side says.
I can answer some of that because I read a lot of the literature on immigration and human trafficking. And one of the things that I noticed, and if somebody else noticed a different thing, please stop me. But the disconnect between immigration policy and human trafficking policy, it seems like they're discussed very much in silos to one another. And so one thing will happen in immigration, or one thing will happen in human trafficking policy, and it'll seem like it's going to be really great and it's really empowering and all of these, you know, really positive directions. But then that's in many ways undone by immigration policy and the way that it criminalizes undocumented individuals and the way that it talks about undocumented individuals and sets up this idea of like a perfect victim. And so I think that that's one of the gaps, how to bridge the divide between human trafficking policy and immigration policy. And I think that that's difficult from the way that we conceptualize who these different policies are targeting. We would like to see human trafficking victims as completely innocent and 100% pure and, you know, defenseless. And we want to see illegal immigrants as awful people. And so I think that the part of that is where some of the divide comes from.
I think just piggybacking off of what Brianna was saying, that another thing that I've noticed going through the literature is that there is some human trafficking literature, but it's a bit sparse and it seems to be focused mostly in specialized journals, like the Human Trafficking Journal, but it doesn't seem to be in mainstream larger fields, like in Public Administration Review or some of our larger journals. There is some, I think that we've seen it in criminal justice, but in other policy areas or other disciplines, that it seems like there is a need to grow and use some of our like core methodologies and theories and apply them to this problem.
I really think the research is showing and will begin more as groups like this group at UCF is what you're doing and how you've joined the fight in human trafficking. With really, we've lived in a culture of complicity for so many years. And so you had the Jeffrey Epstein big scandal and that we're all aware of happen. And so people are saying, wow, there was human trafficking, sex trafficking, right, of minors and adult women happening. You have just recently in the last month, in the last week, what happened in Atlanta with the Asian spas. Well, now there's discussion that those women were having to live in those spas and were victims of sex and labor trafficking. And so all these different conversations of what's right under our nose in all our communities, but because of the culture of complicity and people either being the buyers or feeling in the labor side that just the entire supply chain is things that I think and what Brianna, I think you were saying even, is that we don't want to call it out for what it is. But I think our society and our community is starting to wake up. Who would ever thought the Me Too movement or some of these other things would have occurred? And so I believe the more that we educate, the more that we equip. And as Jan said, that is our mission, is to educate anyone who wants to listen, because I believe their eyes will be open, that light bulb will turn on to connect the dots.
Yeah, and I think that's where Dr. Shakik is, that educating our policymakers. I had lunch with, and this is at the state level, Rep. Renee Placencia 2 years ago. And I was telling him about, that Florida ranks third, the average age is 11 to 14. Orange County has the second highest number of child trafficking cases in the state behind Broward and Brevard. And he was knocked back. He had no idea. And once we have this collaborative conversation, to be able to sit down with our policymakers and educate them, if it's one-on-one or two-on-one or three-on-one, right, whatever that conversation is, to be able to have them really understand not only the personal impact, but the financial and community impact. Because you got to think, when one person is trafficked, when one child is trafficked, that family can't function. If you've got a missing child, you're not going to be able to go to work every day and give it your all. You're going to lose sleep, which means you're going to lose productivity, which means it's going to impact the community. It's going to impact your, ability to generate revenue and keep the rest of your family safe. So there's such a deep impact of just one human being being affected by that. And by educating our policymakers, the reason why they passed the TVPA Act is because they showed I Am Jane Doe to several representatives in Congress. And they got the reality, and that's why we took Backpage down, is they finally understood what was happening to our children. And they just didn't know. That's one of the things that we could totally take on, is create, simplistic, much to your point of having this education being in journals beyond, public policy. But that's one thing we can create, is very simple talking points. We're working with Nicosi to get the Earn It Act passed that holds technology companies accountable for hosting child sexual abuse material, right? We've got to talk in very simple points and have them get it here so that they can understand the impact out there. And I think that's a brilliant idea to put this collective group together to start to really get those educational bullet points out and go talk to our local representatives, our state representatives, and our federal representatives, and have them really fully understand the difference that can make for a nation.
And Jen, you hit on a point that I think we really wanted to get to during this panel as we kind of pre-briefed a week or so ago. Is the data, right? You said that you were using data to educate legislators. Now, one of the challenges that academics have is getting access to good data. From the research perspective, can you guys discuss what you need as far as good quality data to do research to crank out reports that can be translated, right? So what have you identified in data that exists? What do you need from data going forward?
I think for me, one of the challenges that I've seen is that, human trafficking involves a lot of sort of confidential data. And I think that's perhaps one of the challenges why we don't see a lot of academics sort of publication using data on victims. So I think, for me, if I can get victim data, I think it will really go a long way in sort of understanding, sort of the challenges, the importance, and some of the challenges of human trafficking and what kind of policies can be implemented, so to say. So, but because, if I want to collect victims' data, I have to go to IRB, and it's going to be significant, hurdle to get that. It's not going to be exempt. You're going to have to do some, they have to do a thorough sort of almost what's called a full review, because it's going to involve people that may have been traumatized, that may have gone through a lot of experience and things like that. So I think that's part of the challenges for researchers that would like to collect data.
And also the how to do data and how to collect research actually without re-traumatizing victims it's very difficult and very challenging. We have, as a consultant, I have tried to do that, and the sample size that I was able to get was very small. And indeed, it is a challenge. It is a challenge not only for the researcher, but also for the participants who are part of the research study, and also for, to get it approved for IRB purposes and for publication purposes. So it is something that I think is doable, but it may have to be on the services that they receive rather than how they got here, because that will increase their traumatization. And also how interagency collaboration happens in terms of meeting their needs, the immediate needs, and the mid-level needs and long-term needs as well. So, I mean, there are ways to do it, but it has to be done in a way that is very sensitive and very culturally appropriate as well.
I agree with Dr. Tadik and Dr. Marisa. In my journey in the anti-trafficking movement, that is the tug of war that is occurring. That anytime this is brought up within a task force, statewide, coalition, local, you would think it is World War III, because people, advocates, human rights advocates will come against us collecting data. And so there has to be a solution. When I went with former US Senator Bill Nelson to the Senate to speak, that was the number one question of the senators was, where's the centralized data collection? What's occurring in each state? What does human trafficking really look like? And no one could answer it on our panel to the Senate because no state is mandatory reporting on human trafficking. For example, in Florida alone, when we have interns doing research, they have to call all 67 counties in Florida to find out who has trafficking victims through the sheriff's office, the state attorney's office, through DCF, DJJ, et cetera, all the NGOs. It's a big mess. And so the data is, we know that's key, but it is one of the most difficult things to collect pertaining to this population.
So would that be a good first step? Maybe to establish a data repository that people can just feed into, right? So I don't know, from a collection perspective, does that, if we set a framework for collecting data, right? Does that, how rigorous is a framework for collecting data versus, as far as IRB goes, versus going out and doing interviews, right? So if we create a database that people can plug information into where it's somewhat anonymized by a victim, right? It's the way we categorize it. Can we design a database that people feed into that would allow us to then start asking questions of it and wouldn't be intrusive from IRB?
Well, if I can add this, Justin, real quick, my conversations with Professor Terry Kunin at Florida State University Human Rights Center, the solution would be for each region, which we have discussed in Florida, each public university and each region to be the ones who collect the data as a neutral party, right, objectively. And many agencies will then partner. What has occurred when Professor Kunin has tried to do this and have these conversations is universities had wondered who would get the credit, who could publish what, et cetera. And so I think it has to come at a very high level at our public universities in Florida to agree some kind of memorandum of understanding that there's a bigger picture and purpose for this. But that's what we have concluded with conversations statewide, is the universities need to be the ones collecting the data.
Great point, Thomas. I really agree with you. I remember during the human trafficking conference, after the first panel, and I had a discussion with a law enforcement individual officer, and I can't remember his name. And I think this was one problem he brought up, that it's a huge problem for them. There's no centralized way to have information about anything. So I think this is, as Thomas said, this has to come from the state. And I think also that there should just be one sort of repository in the entire state. There shouldn't be 4 or 5, depending on I think it's just be one. But you could have representation, and it should be in a university or research institute. But then you can have representatives from other universities across Florida to be part of that sort of committee or task force that will be managing that data. That way, there's a collaborative effort from different universities doing that with one goal in mind: collect that data and manage it. And then they can all share it. They can use it. They need to do publications, but it should not just be housed in one university alone. I think other universities will fight for it too, because they all want a piece of it and want to contribute to society and all that stuff. So thank you.
We also have to make sure that we collect the same information across universities throughout the state. And that's very important, because if you want to compare what's going on in Central Florida versus North Florida or South Florida, we need to make sure that we are collecting the same indicators. And I'm a strong advocate for not only collecting quantitative data, but to some extent, qualitative data. It's what you're going to get the most for survivors. Sometimes surveys are very dry and to the point, and you get out a lot of information that addresses their attitudes and their beliefs that surveys are not able to capture very well. So perhaps maybe also another repository of interviews or files of interviews or focus groups with narratives or themes that come across from different nonprofit organizations, and then anybody can access that and do a more genetic analysis or from a different perspective or a different framework and see what kind of themes they can identify from their own perspectives or multidisciplinary perspective, and even using that data to complement with the survey's findings as well. So it's just another recommendation.
And Dr. Marisa, I believe the surveys can be created so that it can, like you said, the same questions, right? Or not the same questions, but there has to be a commonality. But how do you deal with, for example, South Florida may be seeing a huge issue with Venezuelans being trafficked, where Central Florida is going to see maybe a different population and North Florida is going to see something different just because of the demographics and the population represented. How do you are able to manage that consistently?
Well, you still will have the same questions asked, even though it's a different population. And what is very important is to see the differences from the Venezuelans and maybe Cubans perspective, where you are still collecting the same type of services that they receive, for how long, what are some of the impacts. They will have the same categories on the survey. However, the perception may change because of what the country of origin or what are the circumstances they came to the United States. And that's the uniqueness that I was telling about it, is that you can actually compare those perspectives across regions, but also identifying differences between different countries or different ethnicities. But it still has to be with the same information to be able to compare and address those comparisons.
All right. Thank you.
And so, one of the discussions we have, bullet points we have in the discussion outline, talks about pilots, projects, and programs, right? And this is where this will take us right back to the policy side of the house, because if we know that there are policies that exist, what exactly are those policies accomplishing if there are no pilots, there are no projects, there are no programs to evaluate, right? And so that is where the rubber meets the road, right? Going forward, if we know that there are some policies coming down from the federal government, given some of the most recent human trafficking legislation, that's going to start mandating the data be reported by organizations, do we know where the funding is to capture that data? Is there funding out there to capture that data? And theoretically, that's where we're going to find grants start to come out and pop up in our grant queries, right? But that goes to the point where we're cutting new territory here, I think. And so if it's a blank slate in front of us, and this is the question, if it's a blank slate in front of us, what is the first thing we do?
In terms of what, Justin?
In terms of getting access to information that allows us to better understand the problem so that we can inform future policies given what's already on the books, right? Because the theory is the policy today is going to evolve. And so the question is how do we inform the evolution of that policy? The theory is research and data and conversations, right? And so if everything that's on the books right now is very cursory and early stage, right? What's the first thing that we need to do to go forward? I know our DISN grant was huge, and I think that was something that the framework that we had there to bring everybody in the room and start breaking it down and going in that direction. But what do we do right now? What's the from your perspective and expertise on research? And what you've seen with the data and the existing policies, what is the first thing we do when we leave this meeting? And that's a discussion, right? There might not be a right answer, but the discussion is.
Yes. So, I think I'm just trying to understand your question. When I heard blank slate, I'm thinking, oh, okay, I have all the resources I need. And, what is the first thing I would do? That's different from what can I do, or what can we do as sort of this group in terms of our own research agenda and what we have access to in terms of data. So first one, if it was the first one, like what can I do? I think it's pretty straightforward. If I have limited resources, and I have the powers that I can, to bring everybody together as maybe a state government or whatever, and the power of the legislature to everything combined, is to create a center, a place where we can get data from across the state. Because without data, it's hard to do any kind of evidence-based decision making. And so I think having good data would be what I would do. But in terms of our own little research team and what we're trying to accomplish, I think we have a few things already on the books that we're working on. We have a paper that's looking at immigration and human trafficking and immigration together. So I think finishing that paper and submitting to a journal, I think will be, to me, the immediate need right now. And when we are done with that, there's also some data. That particular data set too can also be, we can look at other aspects, other variables to write additional papers from that. And then there was also some data that we collected with Thomas's help that looked at the impact of COVID-19 on human service providers, human trafficking service providers. And I think that data too, we can write something about it. You know, human trafficking service providers are still experiencing, you know, some challenges. COVID is not completely gone. So, and I think that paper is almost timely, and we need to do that before it becomes obsolete. When COVID goes away, then, you know, it's less useful, because we want to be able to come up with recommendations to help these service providers. So I'll stop there and let others chime in. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just follow really quick. I think what you were saying, Justin, like finding some way to have a centralized repository of data would be so helpful, because in other areas with vulnerable populations, like people with substance use addiction or other things, they have centralized databases and you can just download it like from ICPSR. And I know this would be a little bit different because it's even a more vulnerable population, but to be able to go someplace when you have a research idea and see what the data is and how you can access it would be really helpful. I mean, beyond this group, in just advancing any of like the scholarship so that we could, you know, have more evidence-informed and evidence-based decision-making from policymakers. But it's hard to do that when we don't have the tools to create the knowledge to help inform them.
So we've got 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure we leave this meeting with something to go forward on. If we know that there are other problem sets that are similar to human trafficking, whether it's terrorism, whether it's counterinsurgency, whether it's trafficking illicit-based chemicals, are there models out there that exist that we can pick up and dust off to create the right framework for doing this research?
So, Justin, you met Noel and Sam from Zero Trafficking, and they use open source data to track human trafficking networks. Human trafficking networks and drug trafficking go hand in hand, and where there's drug trafficking and human trafficking, there's also, you know, all the other things that go along with that. I think that would be a great place, Justin, for you to start a conversation, because I think they've got like 8 analysts that work on this consistently, and that's all they do. I also know Homeland Security is making a call out for that very same thing, to be able to start to gather the data of not only the bad actors, but where it's happening, the hot spots for it. So we can actually go in and work with the survivor networks and get that kind of data. And then the last piece, there are survivor networks out there. And Dr. Tadik, I know that you said that you'd like to talk to them. You know, Tomas is connected with many of them. So that might be a great place to start on the backside, asking, what do you wish, you know, law enforcement knew? What do you wish the community knew? What do you wish the university system knew, so that we can actually start to develop and devise public policies with your input to make the kind of difference there is to make before, in the middle, and after of this crisis?
And I'm glad you said that DHS is getting ready to do a call, because we kind of got that inkling, given, again, we expect a good data call from DHS, DOD, and Health and Human Services. Health and Human Services had some key figures that they were looking for. And, you know, maybe that's just it, right? Maybe we're sitting here waiting on it to come, and it's got to work its way through the system, right? We know the legislation was passed in 2016, and then in 2018 they reiterated the requirement for this data to come by 2021 actually. So you saying that DHS is doing that call means we're ready to receive. We just got to wait on it to get here and make sure the partnerships are there and ready to go. And so maybe maybe that's the answer to our question, right? And you guys tell me if that's right or wrong. Is that's the first partnership, is to reach out to those organizations that have the data or are going to be collecting the data, and either try to inform how they collect it, or tap into the data as it's collected.
Yeah, I also know I get an email every Sunday that tells me about funding opportunities, and there have been a handful of research ones that I just don't even think about because it's not what I do, right? It's an important part of what I do, and it's not what I do. And I want to say it's the Office of in Department of Juvenile Justice. There's a lot of J's in it, so that's what I'm assuming it's juvenile justice. And I know there's at least 2 grant calls specifically for research in this space, because I remember reading them. And Tomas, I think I forwarded one of them to you. I don't remember. But there's a really, I'm going to go into my email and find it, and then because I can hit reply all, and I'll forward you all the email, so then you can get on the email link yourself, because they announce grants literally weekly, and it's just a matter of finding the right one that matches that we think we can go after, and because y'all know what it is to write a grant, so I won't say anything more about that, but it takes something. You got to say all the right words in exactly the right space, and say exactly where the money's going to go, and not my forte. So I will forward that email to this group so you can start getting them, and we can figure out what's already out there or what's coming, because they'll tell you what's coming and when. So we can start to, as a consortium, go after what makes the most sense for us, what we think we can tackle as a team.
And also perhaps maybe we can find a way to educate local funders, because one of the things that we wanted to apply with Jan was the City of Orlando community program initiative they have. And they didn't have human trafficking as the area of interest. They had domestic violence, which we could make a claim in terms of the connection between those two, but still it's not the same as having human trafficking as one of the main areas of priority. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that many local funders, state funders, and federal funders may have about human trafficking, that they don't recognize that it is a problem. And even with the pandemic, it is even a worse problem. So maybe, try to have some sort of meetings with the funders from City of Orlando and just to increase awareness about human trafficking defects and all the consequences that we're going through here in Orlando, and see how we can establish together some priorities so they can actually incorporate human trafficking in the next cycle of grants as a priority area.
Okay, so before I go to asking more questions, let me do the proper thing and engage the audience we have. Are there any questions from the group here that have popped up, either from the panel or the audience? Okay. Go, Brianna.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that one of the things is that human trafficking is such a huge problem that figuring out what the next best step is, there are so many next best steps. And so more deciding, if we have 5 best steps that are all great ways to go, deciding which one we can generate the most interest, or which one's the most useful. Okay, well, now we've got 4 that would be incredibly useful. So then what can we generate the most energy around? What can we generate the most, what are we all the most interested in covering? Because I think that one of the things that I've been noticing is that we haven't talked about the collaboration between nonprofits that Tomas was talking about earlier today. And I think that's really interesting. If Central Florida has done an incredibly good job of networking together nonprofits to address this issue, how did they do it? When did that start? What does it look like? Do the boards work together? Do they not work together? Is it a patchwork? Is there overlap? And that's all research that we could do without having to tap into the survivor population and go through IRB, but could still have a dramatic impact on social services ability to help survivors. But we could do that maybe more immediately without having to go through quite as close of an examination by IRB. And so I think that really being very focused, because one of the things that I've noticed about the human trafficking literature that I've been reading is it's fairly broad, I would say, but not super deep. And so it seems like people get like, yes, I'm going to look at human trafficking, and they don't really focus in on one thing and just kind of go for it. So I think that is a concern to raise.
So Brianna, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm smiling because one of the things that Jan and I have learned is you have to pick and choose your battles in this fight against trafficking. And so you have foreign born, you have domestic, you have adults, you have children, you have sex trafficking, you have labor trafficking, you have everything in between all those. And so we do have to pick what we want to focus on, because the issue is very complex. There's all the different layers. And I think that that's wisdom. And then we can go after the funding and the research pertaining to what we want to focus on.
So I think I'm gonna inject. I think Brianna made a really great point, right? And so I think the first thing we can do is assess the environment, right? That's the first thing to do. We've done some precursory literature reviews, right, as far as what's out there, given immigration, given public policy. But maybe from the nonprofit management side of the house, look at it as in, okay, what's going on in this bubble that we have here in Orlando, and start with that, right? That is, instead of looking at the big policy issues, which we know there's some gaps in there, and we know that we have to wait on some of those things to filter down into programs and programs that leave into data. While we're waiting on that, I think that's the right answer, is to assess the environment that we're in right now and use that as our first query, or the query we use going forward. But it's 5:29, and the panel is theoretically supposed to end at 5:45. So I'd like to open the floor up to closing remarks and going around the horn. This time I'm going to do it in reverse order as far as the openings go. And I'll start with Jan, let her open the remarks for closure. In 3 minutes or so, if you could kind of encapsulate any ideas you've gotten out of this panel and recommendations.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for inviting me. I'm kind of just so you know, I'm a data nerd at heart. I used to work in the telecommunications industry, and I love data. So I'll leave that at that. Facts tell, stories sell. So we gather the right data for what it is we think's wanted and needed for the market, and put together, conversational talking points, because there's money to be had. You just got to go find it, and kind of like grant writing, you got to match the words with what they say, what we want to do and what they want to pay for. Same kind of conversation. There is money in the market, both at the city level, at the county level, and the state level, to create a collaborative framework, so to speak, that can be launched across, quite frankly, the world if we wanted to. And I think talking to the market about what it wants and what's needed is probably a really great first step. And that's something I think we can do pretty simply with an online survey to all the players in Central Florida. Why do you choose to collaborate? What's the key to collaboration? Very much to Brianna's point, do the boards work together? A lot of board members do know each other, right? And they know us and we know them too. So, I think creating a foundation for really what's wanted and needed, and then going to find if there's money to attach to it to create a framework would make a real difference. Thanks.
Rebecca.
Yeah, I just think this was great. And productive discussion. And I think that we have identified a lot of issues and topics to address going forward. So I'm looking forward to continuing our group and advancing all of our research to have a greater community impact.
Thanks, Rebecca. Brianna?
One of the things that I always really enjoy about this group is the fact that we really try to bring together practitioners and academics from various fields and various sectors to really look at the problem of human trafficking as holistically as possible. And I think that that was in a lot of ways exemplified not only by this panel in general, but also by a lot of the topics that we brought up. So that was really gratifying to hear, and kind of it makes me really jazzed to get back to work on it in the coming couple of days.
Tomas.
Yeah, I think we hit some key points here, in that we need to identify, right, the population we're serving. And I think, and what's going to relate to here in Central Florida to start, if that's where we want to start. I think the other thing is really educating our elected officials, right, the local, state, and federal level, like Jan stated, because it's whatever is important to the population and is related is going to be important to them, right? It's all about getting the votes and reelected at the end of the day, and moving policy. So I think that that's somewhere we need to start. For example, I was able to share with our state attorney here in Circuit 9 2 Fridays ago, State Attorney Monique Royale, of the study that Judge Martinez did with 50 felony prostitution cases that came through our courts and our jails, and the economic impact it had on Orange County. Now that made her listen more when we start talking about the economic impact. And so I think we need to find those different ways to relate that this is a humanitarian issue, and we should all care if you have a heart, but the economic impact is going to move our politicians to fund, again, at every level, the fight against trafficking.
And before I shift over to Xi, I want to key in on something you just said, which, we talked about doing an analysis of the nonprofit network here that's doing the work in the community. It would be really interesting to see what the policymakers' perspectives on human trafficking are and what is using them, right? So in the same sense that we want to get an understanding as to what the work is being done by the practitioners, maybe the next question from the policy side of the house is, what's informing who's informing the policymakers? What are their policy decision-making networks, and how are they talking about it, right? So are all policymakers thinking the same things, saying the same things, using the same data points, or are they doing it all in an ad hoc nature, right? And so while the nonprofit management side of the house has some deliverables from the School of Public Administration, maybe that's the question for the public policy side. Is we have policymakers, local and state, who are thinking through policy, but what's informing it and how are they thinking through? And do those even translate into either amendments or policy proposals, and how many of them get through? So maybe just doing a nuts and bolts assessment in that regard is an idea. And I'm glad you said that, Tomas, because it struck right after you said it that may be a good area for research. Xi.
Well, again, I'm really glad that we had this opportunity to talk about these potential issues and then the research projects. So you have said all I wanted to say, but I want to reiterate that I think that the one great thing about this initiative is we have this practitioners in our group, so they kind of bring in the practical, perspective. Like as researchers, we are being nerdy, always think about having data, but really we need to start with something. We start maybe baby steps. Of course, that also leads to future big steps. And then I echo what Tomas said. We need to pick our fight, not only in practitioner field, but also in research. For researchers, we need to pick where we can start. To build a program. I think that working with the project that about the collaboration among nonprofit groups would be a really great start. And if we want to bring in data, I think that we probably need to involve other people from other disciplines like social works, and then people who are really good at building surveys, and maybe some data scientists in the group for us to really have the capacity to create a centralized data point. Yes.
And Dr. Tadik, you get the last word. You're a fearless leader. What are your thoughts?
I thought you were the fearless leader, but thanks, Justin. Honestly, I'm just excited to be here with everyone. One thing that I like about our group is that we are all passionate about this topic. We all want to make a difference. In fact, that meeting is one of the best meetings that I have time. Nobody comes, no matter what you're feeling, you come into that meeting, you feel energized when you leave. And that to me is great. It means you know you're doing something, you're making a difference. So what I would like to say is that, even though we've done a lot of initiatives lately, things have not paid off yet. So just hang in there. It's coming, working hard, and things will start paying off, publications, and we'll start making the impact. But I think we're already making impact anyway. That's first thing. The second thing I'd like to say is that, I'm really excited that now that, we have also Ian Edwards here. So she'll be able to also hopefully provide us another opportunity, just like Tomas, to collaborate with. Tomas has been sort of a pillar in terms of knowledge of what's going on in the front line. But hopefully you will be joining us too, and you have, even stronger pillars now going forward. So I'm really excited that we may have the opportunity to work with you. Next, I also want to tell you, and I think Tomas already, we've kind of shared this with him. In the School of Public Administration, we have students that are doing internships, students that would like to have kind of work with you guys, help you out with what you're doing. Interns, when you need help in that way, this is another way to educate the college kids that don't really know what's going on out there. So by coming and working with you guys, you get to be exposed to this, the issue that we're talking about, and perhaps also go back or come to the school and start spreading the word and educating more people. So if there's anything we can do to help on that issue, we can help, certainly. And our students would love to help too. So thank you everyone again for coming. I'm excited. I'm ready to go back to the drawing board and keep up the work.
Dr. Tadik, can I just share one last word?
Yes, please. You have the last word now.
And this is what reminds me, thank you, sir, of this. This is how I think of this group and everyone on here, my colleagues. It is amazing what we can do and accomplish if we don't care who gets the credit. That's President Harry Truman. So thank you all.
Wonderful. Thank you. So thank you, everyone.